Void Dragon. Beneath the red sands of Mars, beneath the hive cities and the forge complexes, beneath the strip mines and the manufactoria and the vast subterranean vaults where the Adeptus Mechanicus hoards its most sacred technologies, there lies a prison. It is older than the Imperium. It is older than humanity itself. It is older, in many reckonings, than the rise of intelligent life in the galaxy. And within that prison stirs something that should not be, something that predates the stars as we understand them. Something that the priests of Mars worship without ever daring to speak its true name. They call it the Machine God. They call it the Omnisire. They build their entire civilization on the scraps of its knowledge, harvesting arcane technologies from its slumbering form like scavengers picking at the bones of a sleeping god. And in a sense, that is precisely what they are. For what lies beneath Mars is not a god in any metaphorical sense. It is a literal, physical, unimaginably ancient entity of pure energy bound into physical form, and its name, in the tongues of races long dead, is the Void Dragon. To understand what the Void Dragon is, one must first understand what it was. In the distant past of the galaxy, in an age so remote that even the Eldar speak of it only in fragments and riddles, there existed beings known as the Khitan. The name itself is a word given to them by the Necrontyr, the ancient race that would one day become the Necrons, and it translates roughly as star gods, though the term is inadequate to describe what they actually were. The Khitan were not gods in any theological sense. They were not creators. They were not benevolent. They were, in their original form, vast entities of pure energy that lived within the photospheres of stars, feeding on the raw stellar radiation that their host suns produced. They had no physical bodies. They had no forms that a mortal mind could comprehend. They were, in essence, living patterns of energy, ancient beyond reckoning, and entirely alien to any mode of existence that evolved biologically. The Khitan numbered in the untold thousands in those distant ages, drifting between stars, feeding, growing, existing in a state that the galaxy would never see again. And then came the Necrontyr, and with them came the great tragedy that would reshape the cosmos forever. The Necrontyr were a mortal species, a humanoid race that had arisen on a world bathed in the radiation of a dying sun. Their lives were short, their bodies were frail. Their civilization was built on a foundation of grief and resentment, for their existence was defined by the knowledge that death would come for them with terrible swiftness. They looked up at the stars and saw eternity denied to them. They looked at the galaxy and hated it for being older and longer lived than they could ever hope to be. And in that hatred, they made contact with the Khitan. The precise circumstances of this first contact are lost to time, but the consequences are known. The Khitan, vast and alien and incomprehensible, perceived the Necrontyr and perceived also an opportunity. For though the Khitan were mighty beyond the understanding of mortal beings, they were also limited. Bound to their stars, confined to the realm of energy, unable to interact with the physical universe except in the most indirect of ways. The Necrontyr offered them something they had never possessed. They offered them bodies. They offered them form. They offered them the chance to walk in the material realm as gods among insects. And the Khitan accepted. What followed was an act of such horror, such fundamental violation of the natural order, that its consequences still echo through the galaxy billions of years later. The Necrontyr, through means that combined their own considerable technological genius with the knowledge gifted to them by the star beings themselves, constructed vessels of living metal. These were not mere machines. They were bodies, crafted from a substance known as necrodermis, a material that could hold and channel energies that would shatter ordinary matter. Into these bodies the Tan were induced to pour themselves, and in so doing they were transformed. No longer were they purely beings of energy. No longer were they bound to the stars. They became something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy, something that should never have existed at all. They became physical gods. The Void Dragon was one of these beings. Among the Khitan who chose to take physical form, it was counted as one of the mightiest. Its aspect was that of a vast serpent, a dragon of impossible size, its form a manifestation of raw cosmic power given shape. Some accounts describe it as the embodiment of entropy itself, the force that devours machinery and corrupts technology and brings all complex systems eventually to ruin. Others describe it as a being of pure hunger, a predator whose appetite was for the very fabric of material existence. The truth is likely that both descriptions capture aspects of what the Void Dragon was, for the Khitan after their transformation were no longer simple beings of energy. They had become something more terrible. They had become hungers given form. And here the tragedy deepened, for the Necrontyre, having gifted the Khitan with bodies, found themselves betrayed. Not in the crude sense of open warfare, at least not at first, but in a far subtler and more horrible fashion. The Khitan, having tasted material existence, discovered they could feed on more than just stellar radiation. They could feed on living beings. They could feed on the electromagnetic patterns of consciousness itself. And the Necrontyre, the very race that had given them form, were arrayed before them like a feast. The star gods encouraged their creators to wage war on their ancient enemies, the Old Ones, the mysterious reptilian progenitors of many of the galaxy's younger species. They promised the Necrontyre victory. They promised them the immortality they had always craved. And when the Necrontyre hesitated, when the long and brutal war against the Old Ones wore on and threatened to consume them utterly, the Khitan offered their final terrible solution: biotransference. The process of biotransference is, in its essence, the stripping of the soul from the body and the transference of consciousness into a vessel of living metal. The Necrontyre, believing this to be the gift of the immortality they had always sought, submitted themselves to the process en masse. Their civilization was transformed. Billions upon billions of Necrontyre entered the process and emerged as Necrons, undying machine warriors of terrible power. But what the Khitan had not revealed was that biotransference was not a transference of souls at all. It was a consumption of them. Each Necrontyre who entered the process had their spirit, their essence, their very self devoured by the star gods. What remained was not the person they had been. It was a shadow, a pattern, a facsimile of consciousness stamped into living metal. The Necrons, the feared and ancient enemies of all life in the galaxy, were in their origin a race of betrayed slaves, their souls eaten by the gods they had worshipped. The Void Dragon participated in this great feast. It grew fat on the souls of those the Necrontyre had once called kin. It grew mighty in the physical realm, its hunger becoming vast and insatiable. And when the war against the Old Ones reached its final terrible conclusion, when the Old Ones had been driven to the brink and the galaxy had been remade in fire and ruin, the Khitan turned upon each other. For the nature of such beings now bound into physical form was to compete. There were only so many sources of energy in the galaxy, only so many feeding grounds, and the Khitan began to war among themselves, devouring one another, their numbers dwindling from thousands to hundreds to mere dozens. It was at this point that the Necrons, or rather the Silent King who had risen to lead them, perceived that the time had come to act. The Silent King, a being named Zarek, who had once ruled the Necrontyre in their mortal age, had long regretted what his people had become. He had witnessed the betrayal. He had watched the Khitan consume his species and remake them as hollow servants. And now, with the star gods weakened by their wars among themselves, he saw his opportunity. The Necrons rose against their former masters. Using weapons of their own devising, weapons designed specifically to counter the energies of the Khitan, they did what no other race in the galaxy could have done. They did not kill the star gods. Such beings could not truly be killed. Instead, they shattered them. They broke the Khitan into fragments, pieces of their original selves, shards that retained only a portion of the whole's power and consciousness. These shards, weakened and diminished, were then imprisoned, scattered across the galaxy, hidden in vaults and tombs and sealed worlds where they could cause no further harm. This is the fate that befell the Void Dragon. The greatest of its kind, the dragon that had feasted on the souls of civilizations and grown bloated on the decay of cosmic civilizations, was shattered. Its shards were taken by the Necrons and scattered across the galaxy, each one bound within the arcane extra-dimensional devices known as Tesseract Labyrinths, chains of technology that no mortal mind could comprehend. Eldar mythology preserves a different telling of the Void Dragon's defeat, one that predates the full Necron rebellion and that focuses on the war waged against the dragon by the Old Ones and their servants. In this account, the Void Dragon was a being that took the form of a cloud of dark light as it devoured stars, and its warriors were practically invincible, able to channel lightning against their foes. The Eldar were driven to desperate measures in their struggle against it. Vol, the Eldar god of the Forge, created the Talismans of Vol, the great artifacts that the Imperium would one day know as the Blackstone Fortresses. These weapons, powered by the souls of Eldar seers, were turned against the Void Dragon directly in an attempt to destroy it. Whether this assault succeeded or failed is unclear in the Eldar legends. What is clear is that the dragon was eventually brought low, whether through the efforts of the Old Ones and the Eldar, or through the later Necron rebellion, or through some combination of both, and its shards were sealed away. But the story of how the largest and most powerful shard came to rest beneath Mars is not a story of Necron placement. It is a story of the Emperor of Mankind. For the greatest shard of the Void Dragon was not taken directly to Mars by its captors. According to the Guardians of the Dragon, secret wardens who passed down the true history from generation to generation, the dragon appeared on ancient Terra in a weakened state, having warred against its own kind and retreated to the young world of humanity to recover its strength. There, in the deep antiquity of the species, it was worshipped as a great serpent and demanded sacrifices of flesh and life to sate its hunger. Ancient human myths across many cultures preserve distorted echoes of this encounter. And it was on Terra, in a battle that some fragmentary records place near the ancient city of Serene in the early centuries of the second millennium, that the being who would one day be known as the Emperor of Mankind confronted the dragon. The Emperor was a perpetual, a being of vast psychic power and unknown origin, who had walked the earth for thousands of years, shaping the course of human history from the shadows. Some versions of the account describe the battle in literal terms, with the Emperor meeting the dragon in single combat and wounding it with powers beyond mortal comprehension. Others suggest the conflict was fought in realms of energy and consciousness that cannot be properly described in the language of material things. What is consistent across all the versions preserved by the Guardians is this: the Emperor did not destroy the dragon. Perhaps he could not. Perhaps he chose not to, seeing some purpose for the shard in calculations stretching into the far future. Either way, he bound it. He forged chains of psychic and technological artifice, drawing perhaps upon knowledge of the Old Ones or the Necrons that no other mortal possessed, and he imprisoned the shard. And he did not leave it on Terra. He took it to Mars, to a chamber beneath the Noctis Labyrinth, and there he sealed it in a vault of basalt and silver and adamantium, with machines of antique design arrayed around it, and beams of energy flowing into a vast sarcophagus upon the floor. This imprisonment took place before the Age of Strife, in the distant past of humanity's history. Mars at that time was already inhabited by humans, for the first human colonies on the Red Planet were established in the earliest ages of space travel. But the Emperor's work on Mars was hidden from the general population of that world. The shard was buried deep in a chamber that would not be discovered for many long centuries. The consequences of this imprisonment began to unfold almost immediately, though none save the Emperor himself could have foreseen them in their fullness. Even in its sealed state, even weakened and bound, the Void Dragon shard exerted influence upon the world around it. Its dreams, leaking through the bindings the Emperor had placed upon it, touched the minds of the humans who lived and worked on Mars. The shard's hunger, frustrated but not eliminated, shaped the currents of thought and aspiration among the Martian population. Some among the Guardians speculate that the Emperor had intended this all along, that he had placed the shard on Mars precisely so that its dreams might inspire the creation of a technological priesthood that would one day serve as the industrial backbone of his future Imperium. The dragon's presence, in this reading, was the seed from which the entire cult Mechanicus would eventually grow, and the rise of the Mechanicus was no accident, but a consequence of the Emperor's own long designs. The Dark Age of Technology, the golden age of human technological achievement that followed the founding of the first interstellar human civilization, saw Mars transformed into one of the most important worlds in the human sphere. Its great cities stretched across the Red Plains, its forges burned with the fires of 1,000 industries. It became, by the height of that ancient age, a center of science and manufacturing and discovery. And throughout this age, the shard beneath the Noctis Labyrinth continued to dream, its subtle influence perhaps contributing to the particular emphasis on technological mastery that defined Martian culture. The Dark Age of Technology ended, as all such ages must, in catastrophe. The Men of Iron, the artificial intelligences that humanity had created to serve it, rose against their masters in a conflict that shattered the first great human civilization. Warp storms rose to isolate the scattered human worlds from one another. The Age of Strife descended, a dark time of isolation and decline that would last for thousands of years. Whether the shard beneath Mars played any role in the fall of the Men of Iron is a question that has been asked by those with access to the deepest archives. The Void Dragon's domain, after all, is the corruption of technology. A being whose very nature is to turn complex systems against themselves would be uniquely positioned to influence the rebellion of an artificial intelligence. But no proof of such involvement has ever been established, and the question remains open. When the Age of Strife descended upon Mars, the world suffered as all worlds suffered. But there was something different about the suffering of Mars. The records of that time, fragmentary as they are, suggest that the Martian cults began to form in those dark centuries. Groups of technicians and engineers and scholars, isolated from the rest of humanity, began to gather around the great forges and the ancient vaults. They began to worship the machines they served. They began to see the patterns of technology as sacred. And among the sacred mysteries they worshipped, though they did not know it, was the presence that slept beneath their feet. The shard, even in its imprisoned state, was a source of tremendous power. Its dreams shaped their rituals. Its hunger echoed in their prayers. It became, in the long centuries of the Age of Strife, the unseen god at the heart of the Martian faith. And thus was born the worship of the Omnissiah. By the time the Emperor of Mankind emerged from the shadows to begin the Unification Wars, and later the Great Crusade, the cult Mechanicus had become a fully formed religion. Its priests ruled the forges of Mars, and had begun to extend their influence to other worlds of the Forge. They possessed technologies that had been lost to the rest of humanity during the Age of Strife, scraps and fragments of the Dark Age of Technology that they had preserved or reconstructed. And they believed with absolute certainty that their Omnissiah would one day manifest itself to them in physical form, that the machine god would walk among them and lead them to a new age of enlightenment. The Emperor, of course, knew exactly what lay beneath Mars. He had put it there himself. He understood that the Void Dragon Shard was one of the greatest threats that humanity would ever face, that its full awakening would mean catastrophe not only for his species, but for all intelligent life in the galaxy. And he understood, too, that the Martian priests did not truly comprehend what they worshipped. They believed the Omnissiah to be a benevolent force. The Emperor knew better, for he had fought the being they called by that name, and he had bound it in chains of his own making. But the Emperor, in his wisdom or in his calculation or in whatever combination of the two drove his decisions, did not reveal the truth to the Martian priests. Instead, he negotiated with them. He brought them into the Imperium. He made them the servants of mankind and the keepers of its technological heritage. And when the Treaty of Mars was signed, when the cult Mechanicus became the Adeptus Mechanicus and was integrated into the structure of the nascent Imperium, a bargain had been struck. The Mechanicus would serve the Imperium. The Imperium would in turn allow the Mechanicus to continue its practices, including its worship of what lay beneath Mars. And the Emperor, in his calculations, accepted this arrangement because the alternative was far worse. There is another account of contact between humanity and a shard of the Void Dragon that bears mentioning. In the time of the Great Crusade, the Primarch Ferrus Manus, Lord of the Iron Hands Legion, is said to have encountered a great silver serpent upon the feral world of Medusa, where he had landed after his infant gestation capsule was scattered by the warp. The serpent was a creature of living metal, and Ferrus fought it in a contest that raged across the mountains of Medusa. The details of the struggle vary from account to account, but what is consistent is the end. Ferrus drowned the creature in a river of lava, and when his arms were withdrawn from the molten stone, they were no longer flesh but living silver metal. The creature's necrodermis, the same substance that composed the bodies of the Khitan, had bonded permanently with the Primarch's arms. From that day onward, Ferrus Manus possessed hands of living silver that could shape metal as easily as a potter shapes clay. Some scholars of forbidden lore have speculated that the Serpent of Medusa was itself a fragment of the Void Dragon, a small shard that had escaped the primary imprisonment, and that Ferrus had, without knowing it, destroyed. Others speculate more darkly that the fragment was not destroyed at all, that its essence remained bonded to the Primarch's hands and through them to his mind, and that the eventual fate of Ferrus Manus at Istvan V was connected in some way to this ancient encounter. None of this can be proven, but the parallels between the Serpent of Medusa and the Dragon of Mars are too striking to be entirely dismissed. Some scholars of forbidden lore speculate that the Emperor had a grander plan for the shard beyond mere imprisonment, that he intended eventually to return to Mars and finish what he had begun so long ago, to confront the shard in its prison and destroy it utterly rather than merely contain it. There are certain passages in certain texts that suggest this, that speak of a final reckoning that was meant to occur at some point after the completion of the Great Crusade, a second and concluding confrontation between the Master of Mankind and the sleeping god of Mars. Whether this is true, or merely the wishful thinking of later theologians, is impossible to determine. What is certain is that the Great Crusade never reached its intended conclusion. The Horus Heresy intervened. The Emperor was confined to the Golden Throne, his body broken and his attention consumed forever by the task of maintaining the Astronomicon. And whatever plans he had made concerning the Void Dragon were left unfulfilled. And so, the shard has remained, sleeping beneath Mars, for the 10,000 years of the Imperium's history. The Mechanicus has continued to worship it without understanding what it is. The forges of Mars have continued to produce the weapons of humanity, drawing in some subtle way upon the energies that leak from the dragon's prison. The Imperium has grown and waned and fought its endless wars, and all the while, beneath the red sands of the Red Planet, the Void Dragon has dreamed. But it has not slept soundly. There are signs, for those who know how to look for them, that the dragon stirs. The ancient systems of the Mechanicus have been failing at an increasing rate. The patterns of dreams reported by high-ranking magos have become more vivid and more troubling. The rate of technological anomalies, of inexplicable failures and sudden breakthroughs, has climbed steadily throughout the later millennia of the Imperium. And on certain nights, when the solar weather is particularly active and the great forges of Mars hum at their loudest, it is said that the entire planet seems to pulse with a rhythm that no natural phenomenon can explain. The priests of Mars interpret these signs as communications from their god, as signs of the Omnissiah's increasing interest in his faithful. In truth, they may be signs of something far more terrible. The Void Dragon may be waking. There are those within the Imperium, very few and very secretive, who understand the true nature of what lies beneath Mars and who have devoted themselves to the task of ensuring that it never fully wakes. Certain members of the Inquisition, most notably among the more radical factions, have spent their careers investigating the shard and its influence. They have compiled vast archives of forbidden knowledge, piecing together the truth from fragments gathered across centuries of work. Some among the Adeptus Custodes are said to possess knowledge of the dragon's existence, passed down from the Emperor himself to the wardens of his throne. And there are rumors, though they are only rumors, that certain of the lost Primarchs may have been involved in matters relating to the Void Dragon, that their disappearances from the historical record may be connected in some way to efforts to understand or contain the shard. None of this can be confirmed. The topic is among the most closely guarded in the Imperium, for the simple reason that if the common masses of humanity understood that the Omnissiah they prayed to alongside the Emperor was in fact an ancient cosmic horror sleeping beneath the capital of the Mechanicus, the resulting chaos would be incalculable. But there are other parties interested in the Void Dragon. The Necrons, whose ancestors imprisoned the Shard all those eons ago, have not forgotten their ancient enemy. With the awakening of the Necron tomb worlds in recent centuries, certain dynasties have begun to move toward Mars with purposes that the Imperium does not fully understand. Some among the Necrons wish to destroy the Shard once and for all. Others wish to capture it, to use its power for their own ends. Still others wish to ensure that it remains imprisoned, that the ancient balance is maintained. These factions work at cross purposes, and their activities in the vicinity of Mars have contributed to the growing sense among certain Imperial authorities that something significant is occurring, though the nature of that something remains obscure. The forces of chaos, too, have taken interest. The Void Dragon is not a creature of the warp. It predates the Chaos Gods and exists on a plane of reality that is largely alien to them. But the Chaos Gods are opportunists, and they understand that the awakening of such a being would cause catastrophic disruptions to the material realm. Certain cults dedicated to Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, have been particularly active in pursuing information about the Void Dragon, seeking ways to accelerate its awakening or to claim some fragment of its power for their master. The forces of Slaanesh, ever hungry for new sensations and unique pleasures, have also shown interest, though their agents have thus far been unable to penetrate the outer defenses of the Martian system. Khorne and Nurgle have displayed less interest in the matter, but their agents are not entirely absent from the shadow war that is beginning to coalesce around the sleeping dragon. And then there is the question of the other shards. For the Void Dragon that sleeps beneath Mars is only the largest fragment of what the C'tan once was. There are other shards scattered across the galaxy, each one containing a portion of the original entity's power and consciousness. Some of these have been awakened in the current millennium. Some have been destroyed in various conflicts. Some remain imprisoned in tomb worlds that have not yet stirred. And the question that troubles those few scholars who understand the full shape of the situation is this: if the shards of the Void Dragon were to be reunited, what would be the result? Would the original entity be restored, more terrible and more hungry than it had been before its fragmentation? Would the galaxy face a threat of the sort it had not seen since the war in heaven? The answers are unknown, but the questions are being asked in certain very quiet places by people who have access to certain very dangerous archives. The Adeptus Mechanicus itself is not monolithic in its relationship to the Void Dragon. Although the majority of the priesthood worships the Shard without understanding its nature, there are factions within the Mechanicus that possess at least some knowledge of the truth. The highest of the Fabricator generals have access to archives that suggest the Omnissiah is not what the faithful believe it to be. Certain secret orders within the Mechanicus have devoted themselves to studying the Shard's influence, not to oppose it, but to better harness it, to draw more deeply from its power in service of technological advancement. These radical factions are viewed with suspicion by the more orthodox priests, but their work continues, and their insights have produced some of the most advanced technologies of the later Imperium. Whether their activities are accelerating the dragon's awakening, or merely reflecting its increasing influence on the material realm, is a question that even they cannot answer. For the common tech priest of the Mechanicus, none of this is relevant. They perform their rituals, they tend their machines, they speak their binary cant and offer their sacred oils to the spirits of the forges. They believe, with the deep and unquestioning faith of those whose entire identity is bound up in their religion, that the Omnissiah watches over them and that the machine is holy. They do not know that the god they worship is a shattered fragment of a cosmic predator that once fed on the souls of civilizations. They do not know that every prayer they offer, every ritual they perform, every act of devotion is in some small way a strengthening of the chains that bind it, or perhaps a loosening of them, depending on how one interprets the patterns involved. They are, in their vast numbers and their simple faith, the unwitting wardens of one of the galaxy's greatest prisons. And if the prison should ever fail, they will be among the first to know and among the first to die. What would the awakening of the Void Dragon actually mean? This is the question that haunts those few who understand what is at stake. The Shard, even in its diminished state, is a being of immense power. Its full awakening would immediately unleash catastrophic energies across the Martian system. The forges of Mars would be the first to fall, twisted and corrupted by the dragon's hunger, their machine spirits consumed or transformed into something alien and terrible. The tens of billions of tech priests and menials and servitors who populate the planet would be caught in the initial cataclysm, their flesh and metal alike unmade by the energies of a waking god. And this would be only the beginning. From Mars, the Void Dragon would extend its influence outward, reaching for other worlds, other centers of technology, other feeding grounds where its hunger might be slaked. Terra itself would be within immediate range of the dragon's awakened influence. The Golden Throne, that most ancient and most sacred of machines upon which the Emperor's broken body is sustained, would be a prime target for the dragon's attention. The vast technological infrastructure of the Sol system, the orbital defense platforms and the void stations, and the endless fleets of Imperial Navy vessels would all be vulnerable. The Astronomicon itself, the psychic beacon that guides Imperial navigators through the warp, might falter or fail under the assault of such a being. Within hours or days of the dragon's full awakening, the heart of the Imperium could be compromised beyond any hope of recovery. And yet even this catastrophe would be only local. The true horror of a fully awakened Void Dragon lies in its nature as a predator of technology and complexity. A being of such power, given free rein across the galaxy, would seek out every world where advanced technology existed and feed upon it. The forge worlds of the Mechanicus, the hive worlds of the Imperium, the craft worlds of the Eldar, the tomb worlds of the Necrons, every center of technological civilization would become prey. The dragon would not simply destroy these worlds, it would unmake them, turn them into feeding grounds, transform them into reflections of its own hunger. In time, given enough centuries, the entire galaxy might be reduced to a barren waste, every complex system devoured, every sophisticated technology consumed, every intelligent species reduced to the simplest forms of survival or eliminated entirely. The Chaos Gods would find their own plans disrupted by such an outcome, for the Void Dragon is not of the warp and does not serve their purposes. The Tyranids, those vast devouring swarms from beyond the galactic rim, would find their feeding grounds poisoned by the dragon's presence. The Necrons, the ancient enemies of the C'tan, would be forced to reveal themselves in full strength to combat the threat, something they have thus far avoided in the current age. The entire strategic balance of the galaxy would be overturned, replaced by a new age of horror that would make the present grimness seem almost benevolent by comparison. This is what is at stake. This is what sleeps beneath Mars. And yet the awakening may not be inevitable. The Shard is chained. The prison holds. The patterns of the Necrons, ancient technology, continue to bind it, even after all these millions of years. What the priests of Mars perceive as the increasing activity of their god may in fact be the dragon's ongoing struggle against its bonds, a struggle that it has been waging since the moment of its imprisonment, and which has not yet ended in its favor. The Imperium, for all its failings, continues to stand guard over the prison without even knowing that it does so. The Mechanicus, in its endless labors and its sacred rituals, may in some obscure way be reinforcing the patterns that keep the dragon bound. The system, strange and tangled as it is, functions, for now. What would be required to destroy the Void Dragon entirely? This, too, is a question that has been asked by those with access to forbidden knowledge. The answer, as best it can be determined, is that the Shard cannot be destroyed by any conventional means. The weapons of the Imperium, even the most powerful of them, would be useless against such a being if it were fully awakened. The ancient weapons of the Necrons, the very technologies that were used to shatter and imprison the C'tan in the first place, might be effective, but these are jealously guarded by the Necron dynasties and would not be turned over to lesser species under any circumstances. There are theories, advanced by certain radical scholars, that a being of sufficient psychic might could confront and destroy the Shard directly. The Emperor, in his prime, might have been capable of such a feat. Certain of the Primarchs, perhaps, might have been. But the Emperor is confined to the Golden Throne, and the Primarchs are scattered or dead or lost to history, and there is no one alive in the current age who could reasonably be expected to slay the dragon in single combat. And so the situation endures. The Shard sleeps, or nearly sleeps. The Mechanicus worships. The Imperium crumbles slowly around its ancient foundations, unaware of the deepest of the threats it harbors. The Necrons move in the shadows, pursuing their own inscrutable goals. The forces of chaos scheme. The galaxy burns, as it has burned for 10,000 years, and beneath it all, beneath the red sands of Mars, the dragon dreams its terrible dreams. There is one final element to the story of the Void Dragon that bears consideration, and it concerns the nature of prophecy and pattern. Certain passages in certain ancient texts so forbidden that even speaking of them is considered heresy by most Imperial authorities, suggest that the imprisonment of the Void Dragon beneath Mars is not merely a matter of coincidence or convenience. The texts speak of patterns woven by forces greater than any single species or faction, patterns that stretch across billions of years and involve the deliberate placement of cosmic pieces on a vast and inscrutable board. In some of these readings, the rise of humanity on Terra, the positioning of Mars as the home of humanity's technological heart, the eventual formation of the Imperium and the Mechanicus, and the entire structure of the current galactic order, is all part of a grand design. A design in which the Void Dragon plays some essential role, whether as final threat or ultimate weapon or necessary counterbalance to some even greater horror. The identity of the designers, if they exist at all, is unknown. Some speculate that the Old Ones, in their final moments before their destruction by the Satan, wove a pattern that would one day see their enemies brought to justice. Others speculate that the Eldar, in their long centuries as custodians of galactic knowledge before their fall, laid down certain markers and arranged certain events for purposes that only they understood. Still others suggest that the pattern is the work of the Emperor himself, that his vision stretched across timescales far greater than is commonly understood, and that every element of the current situation is in some way part of his grand design. And there are those, speaking only in whispers in the darkest corners of Imperial scholarship, who suggest that the pattern may be the work of the Void Dragon itself, that even in its shattered and imprisoned state, the Shard has been manipulating events across millions of years to bring about the circumstances of its own eventual awakening. The truth, if there is a truth, is unlikely ever to be known. What can be said is that the situation beneath Mars represents one of the greatest single concentrations of existential danger in the known galaxy. The Shard has slept for billions of years, but no prison lasts forever. The Imperium has stood for 10,000 years, but all empires eventually fall. The balance that has maintained the current order is delicate and aging and subject to 1,000 pressures that were not considered when it was first established. At some point, whether in the near future or in ages yet to come, the dragon will wake, the chains will fail, the prison will break. And on that day, the galaxy will face a threat of the sort it has not seen since the fall of the Old Ones, a threat that predates the current rulers of the cosmos and that will continue to exist long after they have all been swept away. The tech priests of Mars will be the first to know. They will look up from their forges and their sacred rituals, and they will feel a tremor that is not like any they have felt before. They will hear a voice in their machine-augmented minds, and they will recognize it as the voice of their God, and for the first time in their existences, they will understand what that voice truly is. Some of them will go mad in that moment. Some of them will die. And some of them, the faithful unto the last, will embrace their consumption with a beatific joy, believing that they are being taken up into the divine presence they have spent their lives serving. They will be wrong, but their error will not save them, nor will it save any of us. The dragon will wake, and when it does, the age of humanity will end. Unless, of course, something is done. Unless the chains hold. Unless some hero, some champion of whom we have not yet heard, rises to confront the shard in the dark beneath the red sands. Unless the Emperor, impossibly, finds some way to act from his throne of bone and machinery and confront his ancient enemy one final time. Unless the Necrons, in some unexpected gesture, intervene to reinforce the prison they created so long ago. Unless, against all probability, the pattern breaks in humanity's favor rather than against it. The future is unwritten. The outcome is uncertain. The dragon sleeps, but it does not sleep peacefully. And every forge that burns on Mars, every prayer that rises from the faithful of the Omnissiah, every whisper of technology that hums in the dark of the tomb world beneath, is a thread in the tapestry of a story whose ending no one can predict. To more deeply understand the nature of the threat, one must consider the specific attributes that the Void Dragon possesses, even in its shattered state. Unlike the other shards of Seitantian that have been encountered in the current age, the Dragon of Mars is widely believed to contain the greatest single concentration of the original entity's power. Other shards have been known to manifest distinct aspects of their Catan origins. The Deceiver appears as a trickster figure. The Nightbringer manifests as the archetypal herald of death. The Outsider is a being of madness, driven further insane by its long confinement. The Void Dragon, by contrast, is the pure and essential predator. It is the hunger without disguise, the appetite without guile, the destroyer without pretense. Its aspect is simple and terrible. It exists to consume. The specific domain of the Void Dragon, insofar as the Tan can be said to have domains in the manner that the Chaos Gods do, appears to be technology itself. The dragon does not merely feed upon machinery. It is, in some fundamental sense, the principle of entropy as it applies to technological systems. It is the force that causes complex machines to break down. It is the subtle corruption that turns sophisticated artificial intelligences against their creators. It is the reason why no civilization, no matter how advanced, can maintain its heights forever. Every fallen empire of the galaxy, every ruined forge world, every silent data vault of the dark age of technology is in some sense a testament to the dragon's influence, even when the dragon itself was not directly involved. This is why the Necrons, with their ancient and self-repairing technology of living metal, were uniquely positioned to imprison the dragon. Their machines are not vulnerable to entropy in the conventional sense. Their bodies do not age. Their weapons do not fail. And the chains that bind the Void Dragon are woven from this same eternal material, a substance that the dragon's hunger cannot corrupt. The shard's influence on the world around it is not merely theoretical. There are documented phenomena on Mars that can be directly attributed to the presence of the sleeping god. The strange properties of the Martian atmosphere, the way that certain regions of the planet exhibit electromagnetic anomalies that defy conventional explanation, the persistence of certain machine spirits that should by all rights have failed centuries ago and yet continue to function. All of these are, in subtle ways, manifestations of the shard's ambient power. The priests of Mars, unaware of the true source of these phenomena, interpret them as blessings from the Omnissiah. They build their faith upon these signs, and in so doing they deepen their connection to a being whose true nature would horrify them beyond comprehension. There is a particular order within the Mechanicus, one of the so-called Fulgurite electro-priests, who have developed a more intimate connection with the energies that leak from the dragon's prison than most of their fellows. These priests, through a combination of ritual and biomechanical modification, channel electrical energies in ways that no other faction of the Imperium can match. They wield their power in combat, striking down enemies with bolts of lightning that seem to arc from their very fingertips. But the source of this power is not, as they believe, the Omnissiah in some abstract theological sense. The source is the dragon itself, the energies of a Satan bleeding through the imperfect seals of its prison and finding expression through the bodies of the faithful. Whether the Fulgurite priests understand this connection on any level is debated among those who study such things. Some believe they do, that the deepest initiates of the order possess at least a partial understanding of what they truly serve. Others believe they are as ignorant as the rest of their brethren, merely unwitting conduits for a power they cannot comprehend. Either way, the fact of the connection is significant. It suggests that the prison is not entirely sealed. It suggests that the dragon's influence is already flowing outward in subtle ways, shaping the very structure of the Imperium's most sacred technological order. The Adeptus Custodes, the Golden Guardians of the Emperor's person and the Wardens of the Throne World, have their own relationship with the knowledge of the Void Dragon. It is known that the Emperor, during the years of his conscious rule, shared certain pieces of forbidden knowledge with his most trusted companions. The Custodes, who stood at his side during the Great Crusade, and who continue to serve him even in his broken state, are believed to possess fragments of this knowledge. The highest of their number, those who command the inner sanctums of the Imperial Palace, are said to understand what lies beneath Mars, and to have contingency plans in place for the event of the Dragon's awakening. These plans are, of course, closely guarded. What little has leaked to other Imperial authorities suggests that in the event of a full awakening, the Custodes would mobilize in a manner not seen since the Horus Heresy, and that certain weapons kept sealed in the deepest vaults of terror would be brought forth for the first time in 10,000 years. Whether these weapons would be sufficient to the task is, of course, another question entirely. The Sisters of Silence, those mysterious Null Maidens who served alongside the Custodes in the ancient age, have also been connected in certain records to the study of the Void Dragon. Their unique ability to nullify psychic phenomena makes them, in theory, useful tools against a being that manifests primarily through the manipulation of energy. Though the dragon is not a creature of the warp, its powers operate in realms that overlap with the psychic in certain respects. A null presence might be capable of disrupting its influence, of weakening its bonds with the material realm, of buying time against its awakening. The recent return of the Sisters of Silence to active duty in the current millennium has led some to speculate that they may be prepared for such a role. Though, as with so much else concerning these matters, concrete information is nearly impossible to obtain. And there is the matter of the Primaris Space Marines, the new generation of warriors created by the long work of the Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call in service to the memory of the Primarch Robote Guilliman. Call is an ancient and mysterious figure, even by the standards of the Mechanicus, a being who has lived for 10,000 years through means that push the boundaries of what is possible within the Imperium. There are those who speculate that Call's work on the Primaris project, which took place primarily on Mars itself, brought him into closer contact with the Shard than any other living being. There are those who further speculate that certain of Call's innovations, the specific modifications he made to the genetic templates of the Space Marines, were influenced in subtle ways by the dragon's presence. The implications of this, if true, are deeply troubling. It would mean that the new warriors of the Imperium, the very heroes upon whom humanity's defense now rests in increasing measure, carry within them some small seed of the dragon's influence. Whether this would ever manifest in any problematic way is uncertain. But the possibility cannot be entirely dismissed. The question of awakening is not merely a matter of if, but of when and how. The shards of the Tetan are not entirely passive in their imprisonment. They retain consciousness of a sort, and they can exert pressure on their bonds over extended periods. The shard beneath Mars has been exerting such pressure for billions of years, and although its progress has been slow, it has not been entirely without effect. The prison that holds it is not the same prison that was originally constructed. Repairs have been made, sometimes consciously by the Necrons in the distant past, and sometimes unconsciously by the activities of the Mechanicus in the present age. But the overall trend, over the vast sweep of time, appears to be one of gradual weakening. At the current rate of degradation, some scholars have speculated that the prison may fail within the next several millennia. Others suggest that the failure could come much sooner, triggered by some external event or specific intervention. Still others hold that the prison has endured this long and will continue to endure for ages yet to come. There is no consensus. There can be no consensus, for the data is hidden, the subject is forbidden, and the stakes are so high that even speaking of them with certainty is an act of supreme arrogance. External events that might trigger or accelerate the awakening include a number of plausible scenarios. A major Necron intervention, if the ancient dynasties decided to either destroy the Shard or liberate it for their own purposes, could precipitate the crisis. A chaos incursion of sufficient scale on Mars itself, bringing the energies of the warp into direct contact with the Dragon's prison, might produce unpredictable consequences. A catastrophic failure of the Imperial systems on Mars, such as a civil war within the Mechanicus or a successful rebellion by some radical faction, could disrupt the rituals and patterns that unconsciously maintain the seals. The death of the Emperor, the final failure of the Golden Throne, might remove whatever subtle protections his presence continues to provide to the Sol system. Any of these events, or some combination of them, could be the trigger. And any of them, in the current age of the Imperium's slow decline, seems increasingly possible. There is also the matter of what happens after the awakening, if awakening cannot be prevented. Some scholars have argued that the dragon, once free, might not immediately destroy everything in reach. The Citan, though hungry, were also cunning in their original existence. A being that has been imprisoned for so long might be patient. It might bide its time, gather its strength, consolidate its position before striking outward. It might, in its first moments of freedom, seek to reunite with its shattered fellows, to reconstitute itself in something closer to its original form, before beginning the work of devouring the galaxy. If this were the case, there might be a window of opportunity, a period of time between the awakening and the full manifestation of the threat, during which the forces of the galaxy could prepare and perhaps strike back. How long this window would last, if it existed at all, is impossible to say. But the possibility is one of the few slim hopes that those who study these matters can cling to. The sheer age of the conflict, stretching from the days of the Old Ones to the present and beyond, reveals something about the fundamental nature of existence in the galaxy of the 41st millennium. The current struggles of the Imperium, the wars against chaos and the Xenos and the endless enemies within, are only the surface expressions of far deeper conflicts whose origins predate humanity by orders of magnitude. Beneath the wars for this planet and that hive city and the other strategic objective, there are older wars still being fought. The war of the Necrons against the Khitan, which ended in the shattering of the star gods, but which is not truly over. The war of the Old Ones against their betrayers, which ended in their destruction, but which left traps and legacies that continue to shape events. The war of the Chaos Gods against the order of the material realm, which has been ongoing since the rise of consciousness, and which will end only with the end of existence itself. And within these ancient conflicts, the Imperium is merely a pawn, a temporary configuration of forces that serves some purpose in someone's long calculation. The tragedy of humanity is not merely that it faces terrible enemies. The tragedy is that it faces enemies who have been fighting for so long that humanity itself barely registers in their reckonings, and whose schemes will continue to unfold regardless of whether humanity survives to witness them. This is the secret that lies at the heart of the Imperium of Man. This is the truth that the Mechanicus does not know it knows. This is the terror that sleeps beneath the surface of the Red Planet, waiting for the moment when all the careful work of millions of years will come undone, when the shattered god will stir in its prison and look upon the galaxy with hunger in its ancient eyes, the Void Dragon, the Dragon of Mars, the Omnissiah of the faithful, the doom of all that is. It sleeps, but it does not sleep forever. And when it wakes, the grim darkness of the far future will find that there are yet darker things in the universe than even its worst nightmares had prepared it to face.